Okay, good morning. As you can see, my picture is a lot clearer than it has been. So I'm using, actually I'm using my son's old computer. Um, he's getting ready to deploy to Kuwait in a few months. And so he bought a new computer. So he gave me his old one that has a better functioning camera. So I'm getting used to it, and you can see me. I'm in my office, and I'm going to be talking about the um, curriculum vision and the curriculum project. The vision's simple. You see the guidelines. There are four statements. I need a paragraph on each statement. Um, and let me pull that up real quick. I'm using my, that's not. Okay, so the first statement is provide a description of the classroom and school environments. Um, so in I'll be talking to the higher ed folks in a minute about all this. Um, provide a description of the community within which the school is situated and where your students come from. Um, so if you had a high school, that's going to be pretty broad, right? Just for instance, if you're at Thibodaux High, it's not just Thibodaux, but all of northern Lafourche, including Chack Bay, um, in I think Kramer as well, right? Both the city and the rural areas outside. Um, Same, so um, you may be a bit more homogeneous in some of the schools in Terrebonne, the way they're laid out. Again, South Lafourche, I'm sorry, South Terrebonne would be broader. Um, so because you have a few more high schools, that type of thing. So you get the sense of that. So talk about your instructional practices um, that you think, not what you're doing. If you think what you're doing is good, talk about that. If you think you need to go beyond, do something different, then talk about that. But make sure that's clear in your paragraph. And it doesn't have to be extensive. Okay. So generalities. If you think if you're having to teach to the test and you would rather not, then talk about that. Finally, and in some ways, this is the more, all of these are important, but sometimes you'll leave this out. And this is very important. So you need to link your vision um, to some theoretical or philosophical perspective. It doesn't, we have seen a number in this class. Um, so if you've had 504, you've also seen some others, or if you're taking it now. And you may very well, through your school um, or through other courses that you've taken, there's a philosophical or theoretical um, vision that is part of your school, then you can include that. But if you cite a vision, the theory or philosophical vision outside of this class, make sure you provide a citation. So let's just say, for instance, if you cite Harry Wong, just throwing one out there, then cite the work from Harry Wong that you're thinking about. So that's pretty much 4 paragraphs, page and a half, single document. That's pretty straightforward for the vision. Okay. So for the curriculum project, okay, so let me wait. Higher ed folks, talk about your work environment. Okay. So, if you're working in a particular department at Nichols, if you're engaged in athletics at Nichols, whether it's as a trainer or as a coach, okay, then your vision would come out of that. And there's, again, that theoretical or philosophical aspect should be important. If you're not sure, then let me know. Just put it in the paragraph. Okay, at this point. So, that's kind of where we are with that. Trying to help the higher ed folks as best as possible. But if you're unsure, only for the higher ed folks. Okay, now let's move on. The curriculum project. And I'm just reading from the guidelines that are in Moodle. So the first thing about the curriculum project is this was never meant to be an abstract exercise. So, as a K-12 teacher in particular, then you want to develop this project, which is essentially creating a unit, okay, for something you're going to be doing, whether it's this semester or next, that you're going to be teaching. All right. So this gives you an opportunity to experiment a little bit, is the way I would kind of, lay that out. To work on something because the whole point of this project is for you to try to put into practice the things that you've read and written about in this course. Kinds of things, trying to get you to keep, quote, Bill Dahl, to keep knowledge alive. Whether that is Bill himself, for instance, or his use of Whitehead, or the you've gotten Whitehead 3 different ways. So he's clearly an important aspect. And you've gotten a little Dewey. I don't know that that's extensive, and if you really can take much away from that. So, and you can even have Harvey in some of the relationships that I've pointed out with more modern ideas of curriculum. So, this is meant to help you with that. For the higher ed folks, you may want to come talk to me, or we can have a Zoom conference if you prefer. I think the folks in athletics are a little simpler. There are, PE standards maybe that you can address, but we can talk about that. There may be other areas that you can work on. The folks that are administration, we'll need to talk about that a little bit, see what we can come up with. And I'm definitely here. We can meet here if you're on campus, and we can try to come up with something for you to develop, a unit from. So think of this as a planning activity using some backward design. So all that is, and that's pretty open-ended for higher ed to try to get you just thinking in some of these terms. So for the K-12, I would like you to first look for either or both some math or Common Core, not Common Core, ELA. So it's no longer Common Core, I realize that. That's another word I need to change. So the Louisiana standards, academic standards for math, ELA at your grade level. You know, if you think about it, no matter what your subject area is, and I would even place university folks in this framework, university teachers like myself, that we're all, particularly we're all language, ELA teachers. It's about, how we use language and how we get our students to use language. I could easily, in any of my courses, provide objective tests, multiple choice, etc. Okay, but there's no writing in that process. So even in my undergraduate class, which may have as many as 30 students sometimes, I essentially do the same thing, just not online. And I have you write. And writing, to me, reading and writing are the two most important things that you can do when you teach, have students do when you teach. You get a real sense of that from a bygone era with Harvey. And then again with Ames. Ames marks a transition from a fundamentally oral society to a literate written society. So rhetoric changes from speech making, if you will, debating, if you will, to writing, to a compositional world. You see Ames in that framework. Okay. And we are basically still in that compositional framework. We are now entering into a world of what one scholar has called secondary orality. Okay, so whether it's the use of PowerPoints or video or these different apps, technological apps that allow you to present oral, types of composition, even to the point of movie making. But we also fall back on the idea that you still need, you don't wing that, right? You still have some literate act, a script of some type. You are laying out these ideas to a larger extent before you use the technology to present something in a using audio video ideas. So we're still, that's secondary orality. Excuse me. We're still in a literate world, and we can talk about other literacies, but we're still in a literate world, a reading and writing world. So that's the first thing. If you're a social studies or science teacher, as the guidelines talk about, you need to select some matching standards that work with whatever math or ELA standards. And for social studies folks, ELA standards literacy standards may be easiest, but see if, depending on what you teach, see if you can't come up with some math activity. For science folks, just the opposite. The math may be the easier, depending on what science you're teaching. But see if we can't come up with some literacy standards. So anyway, so we'll call the group of standards that you come up with a cluster. Okay, so you have a cluster of standards that you are going to evaluate. This is the unpacking part. And so you'll see, as you see, you will then use the assumption chart that's in the guidelines to then ask questions about what that group of standards is asking of you as a teacher and what's asking your students. What are you and they supposedly know? What do they assume about what you know and what you can do? Okay. So what kind of skills are you going to engage in? Okay. So this is the analysis part of the curriculum project. So we're going to engage in Harvey's exercise, right? We're going to do analysis and genesis. And so this is the first part. So, you're going to you're going to take apart Penelope's web, in a sense, as Harvey talks about. Pull the strands of these standards out. And easiest thing is to use the assumption chart and write, your analysis in the space available. If you don't want to do that, if you want to create more of a narrative, that's fine too. So either way, I'm happy with that. Okay. Also, you need to, just like you do in your vision, you need to talk about your classroom environment, because I want you to think about what you know about your students. And when I say students for higher ed, it could be your coworkers. If you're in athletics, who you coach or who you serve, the athletes that you serve. Okay. So let's think about these types of things as you unpack. You're ultimately going to create, basically, for K-12 folks, a 5-day unit. And we'll talk about that in a second. So here so we have the unpacking guidelines. You go through those, and that's all pretty straightforward. So, you'll have an introduction, talking about the environment, talking about your class, your grade level. You can talk about why you selected the standards you selected, how they fit. There's also an expectation of collaboration. So for K-12 teachers, collaborate with your co-teachers in your area, collaborate with your curriculum specialist, collaborate with whoever you think it will be wise in terms of looking at these, breaking down these standards, okay, and analyzing what they're expecting. So we have in the assumption chart, you have activity and skill, knowledge of content. You have environment, and this is an important standard. What does it assume about your environment? And there may not be a lot of difference anymore. Schools have retooled most of their classrooms, I think. We're no longer in, most of you are no longer in classrooms or desks in a row. You're at tables, even although that, there are some exceptions. But talk about the physical environment and how that's conducive to particular practices. What's your technological environment? Well, that's part of materials, but you can talk about the technologies you have available, and how you may apply technologies to these standards that the standards may not fully take into account yet, if that makes any sense. This was in the old comprehensive curriculum. This is really where this began to develop. It is that curriculum assumed particular activities, but those activities are like a generation ago, many times. So what are the what is the standards assume about the environment you work in, and talk about that environment and the social or relational environment of your classroom. How well do your students work together and work with you in different ways? Okay. The materials, talk about the interdisciplinary content, and then talk about the assessments. Describe for me begin with your summative assessment for the unit. How are you going to test that unit? Okay. And then talk about your formative assessments for each day. Okay. So you don't necessarily have a summative assessment for any given day. Okay. Everything's formative leading to the summative assessment. So if you engage in guided practice in which a product is produced by students, if you engage in independent practice where a product is produced, if you engage in a close with an exit ticket or some other activity that the students produce a product, okay, you have in our new parlance, kind of what we're learning right now, is you have a problem-solving product and a thinking aspect. So talk about how you're getting students to think through those activities, through those strategies, and what are they producing, okay? And that would be for each day until you reach your summative assessment. And then you can talk about how that assessment is linked, how those those formative assessments are linked to the summative assessment. Okay. So the assessment, the backward design on the assessment um, I think is a very critical thing going forward. And I don't mean this to appear to fall too closely in line with end of course testing, because there are things as a teacher that you want to know that isn't necessarily about what your students know, that isn't necessarily linked to that end of course test. Okay. And what they're able to do. You want to be able to see their thinking and learning, which is difficult to do and can only be done through some product. Okay, where they can demonstrate their ability to problem solve. Okay, if you have any questions about that, email me. Then I want you to develop, some I can statements. And here, this is really what are students thinking about. And there's a depth of thinking chart. I think it's attached here. And here we have different forms of thinking. And it sort of suggests particular types of product. And so, what kind of depth of thinking are you trying to reach? And you can take a look at that depth of thinking chart. You have a lot of verbs here. Ever since Bloom's taxonomy, we're big on verbs. Whether or not these verbs are actually put into practice, it's hard to know. And we have 4 levels on this depth of thinking. The assumption is the 4th level is higher. So, here's a way to think about those assessments and those activities. Okay. When you put all this back together after you've done all that assumption, right, and you have a more particular idea of what you need to do for your students, now you can begin to talk about the types of methods and strategies and practices to move your students forward, to move them towards success. How do those strategies fit into your school and classroom environment? Talk about the collaboration that you've done. Talk about the content integration. Some folks just do subheadings for each of these. So the format can be descriptive, or the format can be a lesson plan. I'm not requiring a Nichols lesson plan, but I am asking maybe for something a little bit more in depth than you typically use, where you have everything there that I'm asking for. Looking for objectives. You may construct the objectives using Bloom's, or you can use the depth of knowledge chart. We're looking for increased rigor, and it's about, depending on your grade level, it's about increasing the complexity. And this comes from the Curriculum of Abundance book that you're asking your students to engage in through the unit. Okay. So that's, So you got first your analysis, and this is your, if you will, your genesis. I'm asking you to provide some sense of creativity. Uh, you know, level 4 of the depth of knowledge chart, not just a mere synthesis. So that's the first two parts: the analysis, the genesis, and then finally, in some ways, most importantly, your reflection. I too often have to send the first draft of the curriculum project back to folks because there's no reflection. I will, if I get it in time, I can do that. You know, if I get it the night before grades are due, I can't do that. But I want you to reflect on doing the project. What did you learn about the process? What did you learn about yourself? You may do much of this. And if that's so, talk about how this reinforces what you've already been doing. And so the more experienced you are as a teacher, the more likely you've engaged in something like this. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here, but I am trying to get you to think explicitly about the process, which hopefully will then help you with that process, even if you're engaging in much of this already, whether individually or as a group of teachers. Okay. And this is more than a mere curriculum mapping, because that curriculum mapping is just laying out the basic logic of a set of lessons trying to reach a particular end. In our cases today, that end is, for many of you, end of course test. So it's more than just the map. We got to fill in the spaces. We got to think about our students and about ourselves. You may come up with things that you want to work on. Talk about that in your reflection. There may be things you want to challenge your students with. Talk about that in your reflection. For the higher ed folks, we're going to see the reflection is still very important. The process is important. You're going to analyze some aspect, whether it's a group of standards or some other givens, and then you're going to, create, engage in a synthesis or genesis, and then reflect upon that process. So again, I have to really urge the higher ed folks to give me, to come talk to me, whether we do a Zoom or come to the office. So that's pretty much it. Email me if you have any questions. So I hope everyone is doing well. Thank you.